the impossible, whatever remains, however improbable, must be true.
And it is not a question of a little occultism or a touch of mysticism, Mr. Denton. It is vampires. There's a host of damned souls at Pelham House.
I am thy father's spirit, doomed for a certain term to walk the night.
Here, the old gods aren't dead.
And what of the true god?
He's dead. Can't complain.
People assume that time is a strict progression of cause to effect, but actually, from a non-linear, non-subjective viewpoint, it's more like a big ball of wibbly-wobbly, timey-wimey stuff.
You're listening to Paranormal UK Radio.
Hi everybody, this is Irene Allen, the host of the Paranormal UK Radio Show, the flagship show to the Paranormal UK Radio Network.
Did you get all that in one breath?
No, I had to stop. I had to stop in between. You know, it's like when I'm saying it, I'm rising up out the chair because I'm just trying to get it all in. So I'm kind of going up in the air. And then when I can't get it all in, I just kind of flop back down again.
Oh, you need to take that deep breath just before you start so you have enough air in your lungs to finish that long sentence.
All right. Okay. Hang on a minute. Hi, everybody. This is Irene Allen, the host of the Paranormal UK Radio Show, the flagship show to the Paranormal UK Radio Network. And here I am to end tonight with my host, Mark Johnson.
Hello. By the way, I'm keeping that first bit.
Why?
Why? Because...
Oh, Why?
Oh,
you're going to do a blooper on me, aren't you?
Yeah, well, I think people will enjoy it.
Yeah, maybe. Maybe. Maybe not. Maybe. Who knows?
Who knows? So how are you doing?
How am I doing?
Yes.
I am very tired. Not sleeping well. Been very, very busy. Work.
I can imagine.
And, doing a bit of mountaineering. And that's about it, really.
Well,
that's all I can say. Otherwise, I'll have to kill you.
Yes, I know. I know. Ask no questions.
Yeah. How are you?
I'm doing okay myself. Just the weather out here.
Skiing?
What's that?
You been skiing? Been skiing again?
2 weeks ago, I went skiing up in Lake Placid, where the Olympics were held in 2000 in upstate New York, and had a blast. First time skiing in about 20 years, but I still did pretty good. Yeah,
my son came back from the French Alps yesterday.
Rub it in, why don't you?
Another friend is in the Austrian Alps.
Rub it in. The Alps. Yeah. Our mountains are nothing like the Alps, although...
No, they're not. They're like molehills compared with the Alps.
True. Although the skiing...
But you got all that snow in your back garden, haven't you? Come on, Mark.
No, actually...
Have you not made a slide or anything? You've not had your sledge out? Have you not made a skid run so you could slide along on your feet?
It's gone already. Mother Nature is going nuts. We had 5 inches of snow on Saturday, and it's all gone now because temperatures shot up from the 20s up to today's it's in the 60s.
Well, spring has definitely sprung here. We've got all the daffodils out and the crocuses and one thing or another. And my next door neighbour's got some daffodils. So I think I'll go and cut the heads off of them because they look quite good.
Yeah, I'm sure that would irritate him as well, too. So, I'm sure that would irritate him, too. So I think that was the point.
Well, he shouldn't have put his bloody wall on my land, should he?
That's true. That'll teach him. Cut his daffodils down.
No, I'll cut his daffodil off, all right. We've got some sad news tonight as well, haven't we?
Yeah. I mean, in fact, I don't remember I think I mentioned on our last show how we lost John Edmonds, the owner of the Stardust Ranch, who'd been on our show a couple of times, and he had passed away from a long-time serious illness and complications from COVID. And then today, I find out that a local UFO researcher here in New Jersey, David Stennett, passed away yesterday from a heart attack, which took me by surprise because I'm seeing all these messages on Facebook saying rest in peace and condolences. I'm going, wait, what? I just saw him post the other day. And I researched it, and yeah, he passed away too. So I've been friends, virtual friends with David for many years. I never got the chance to meet him in person. He was always a character. He and I never saw eye to eye in a lot of different things, but that's...
No, you didn't, did you?
But you know what? It says something that you can totally disagree with somebody's views and still be friends.
Still stay friends.
Yeah. So... Yeah. Wish that was the way and more in the world, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, so condolences to both their families. Then.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. It seems like we're losing a lot of them lately.
Yeah.
The world has gotten interesting. So anyway, why don't we go ahead and get on with the show? Talk about some more brighter subjects.
Go on then.
Really? I can? Do I have your permission?
Yeah, go on.
Okay, fine. Well, we want to welcome back to the show. This gentleman was on our show like almost over 5 years ago, and we're very happy to have him back. Want to welcome Barry Fitzgerald to the program. How you doing, Barry?
Hi, folks. It's great to be back, and thanks very much for having me on.
Oh, certainly.
Barry.
It's great to talk to you again. I know it's been a long time, and I know you've been very busy these last few years with. Mm-hmm. I've been seeing lately all the conferences you've been running around to. You must be exhausted.
Very much so. I just got back from a recent one in the UK, Festival of the Unexplained, and the ferry or the ship back, it got cancelled because of bad weather. So unfortunately, we had to catch the next one, which meant that we were coming back into Ireland in the middle of the night, and I'm still trying to catch up on that.
I can imagine. That must have been rough. Well, I hope you had a good time at the conferences.
We did, yes.
Well, where was that conference then, Barry?
That was up just outside Nuneaton.
What was that?
And it was we had a fabulous time, and we met some really, really good people. And it's always good to share experiences and learn some more of our fellow researchers. It's something that we've been robbed of in the last several years.
Yeah, tell me about it. Now, I think weren't the Kinsellas there? Ronald and
They
Philip?
were indeed, and great respect to those lads. They had me in stitches all weekend. They're great lads.
They're
great
wonderful. Yeah, they have their own show here on the network, the Twin Souls radio show, which comes out the end of every month. But yeah, it's they're really great people. So with just to bring some of our listeners up to date, any new listeners who may not be aware, talking a little bit about Barry's background. Now, you've been a long-time paranormal researcher, starting off there in Ireland, and then you had your stint with being on the Ghost Hunters TV show, then being the lead researcher on Ghost Hunters International. For how many seasons were you on that show?
GHI won't run for three and a half seasons, following that, I went on then and continued the research. So we finished filming in 2011, and I just kept doing what I've always done, and continued to write books and things like that. I think there's about 11 or 12 books out now on various different subjects. In fact, speaking of book releases, there's just a new one came out at the beginning of the month, The Deceptions of Gods and Men, which I'm sure we'll talk about later.
Yes, I was looking at that one. I definitely would like to talk about it. And one of the things that struck me is something that I'm looking into here locally, but over the last few years, I've become more fascinated, and it's right in line, I think, with a lot of the research that you do is not so much ghosts, traditional ghosts and hauntings, but areas of land or areas of locations that seem to have high strangeness type of activity, whether you want to look at like elemental types of activity or maybe even interdimensional. I've done a couple of investigations over the years of different areas like caves and mines, and even a couple areas where I lived in around this area that just seemed to have a lot of concentrated activity that's not really related to anybody who's like lived there and died.
Yeah, we were working with the Legend Seeker project for quite some time, exploring what's possibly still on the land or coming through the land that could interact with us today. I a lot of listeners will probably think, well, that's just superstition, but the thing about that particular response is that it's formed on a modern understanding, a modern habit that we have formed as a civilization, in which we have become severely detached from the environment in which we grew up in, and we rarely walk anywhere now. For a majority of us, we jump into the cars and off we go, and for those that do walk, they stick earbuds into their ears, and we continually isolate ourselves or try to isolate ourselves from the environment around us, but it by no means does it mean that those things disappear. They're still very much there, still very much part of the landscape, and if they wish to make themselves known, they will do so. And we have had many experiences with entities and energies out there that far outsurpassed anything I had ever encountered within the normal run-of-the-mill haunted house. In fact, some of the encounters were that extreme. I had said to my co-author Cormac Strain, I said, if we ever encounter that again, I'm finished. I'm retiring. It was that extreme. It was that horrifying, in fact. Whenever we investigated one of those particular locations, I'll just go into it in a little detail. There was a location on top of a mountain in which the locals were aware that there was something odd with the place, but they weren't quite sure. And there were stone houses that were built on top of this particular mountain. Now, the people in the stone houses were being ripped out of their beds at night, and this reached a certain level where they just abandoned the place. Years later, then this particular farmer bought the land and decided to open it as a quarry because there was a seam of coal within that mountainside. Now, he never checked the historical aspect of the landscape, and that would be something that we would tend to do within Legend Seekers, is to go back and look at the habits of our ancestors, because they were the ones that were cued in. And strangely, around this particular mountain, in which mountains are normally seen as sacred places, there was nothing on the mountain. They built nothing on the mountain. All of their structures lay around the mountain, not on it. And that was the first clue. Something was wrong, because they knew there was something wrong with this place. And cue the modern age, and the place was opened as a mine, and that's whenever all hell came to town, so to speak. And between people having their hands sawed off, it was like something out of a horror movie. Wow. And religious, the religious artifacts that were kept inside the buildings were smashed to a point of powder. There was a complete job in these done. Yes, Irene.
What country was this?
This is Ireland.
Ireland.
Yeah. Yeah. And they tried to give chase to this being because it was seen on several occasions, but they could never get close enough, nor could they see its face. It was always its back. And so to try and stave off the advance of this thing, which was insidious, they brought in German shepherds. And this thing murdered the German shepherds. There was 4 dogs that were murdered on site. It got to a stage where they just simply had to shut the place down. The equipment that was being brought onto site stopped working. It was brought off site. It began working again. And whenever we visited, we too also experienced that problem with the electronics within our vehicles. And we had our own encounter there with, and Max, my former companion, canine, we too also had our experience there. But the situation, the way that the situation fell, and the case fell, we usually were very open about giving out our GPS coordinates and who you need to see, about going to these locations and everything else, and the experiences that we had. This was one that we didn't give the GPS coordinates out. And it wasn't a case of hyping up what possibly was there. That was not the case. It was to ensure the safety of anyone who may be stupid enough to go there and disturb something that they would have no control over. So that's why that particular story never made it to the public.
I'm curious, when you said that this entity or creature was seen, but you couldn't see the face, but what did it look like in general? Was it
just
big?
Looked like an old man.
Like an old man in clothes?
Just an old man in clothes, walking away. He always seemed to walk the same path from the. It was a path from the tool shed across into the offices, and it was the same walk that he'd done time and time again, and it was deeply, deeply problematic. I know that the church had gone there to exorcise the place, and they had tried several times until finally they admitted that there's nothing more they can do. And they advised that they actually stated that they had come across this type of thing in South Africa, and there's nothing they can do with it. And eventually the place was shut up. And it was several years after that particular case that Cormac and I worked that we came across another quarry in Galway in which people were being thrown to the ground. And vehicles, the quarry vehicles there were being destroyed by invisible forces. So it seemed that once they had broken ground in these places, once they had started to bore into the rocks, that's whenever trouble started.
Yeah, you hear the stories of, when they start digging the mines, the infamous Tommy knockers stories that miners talk about. But I mean, I've even, like I mentioned earlier, I investigated both a mine and a cave, and the cave was what was really interested me because it's an attraction. They bring people into it, but I got to go way back in at night when it was closed. It was just me and a couple of team members. Yeah. And now this location, nobody's ever died in it. The Native Americans who lived in the area stayed away from it. They never went in it. They never used it for shelter. And we were deep back in, maybe about a few thousand feet and about 100 feet underground. And yet we got all sorts of activity, everything from, light anomalies appearing in the rocks. And I'm not talking about an orb. I'm talking about actually lights that would show up, to a lot of EVPs. We had a voice telling us to get out. And yet most people from the paranormal community would say, oh, well, somebody died, or so it's a ghost or whatever. But there's no record of anybody ever having died there, had anything to do with it. And it was just strange, and it just had that feeling like something was living in there. And there's lots of stories of it seems like you go further underground, you go in these places, there's something living in there.
Yeah, it can be a problem with our assumptions with the research. Sometimes we don't go back far enough, and nor do we cross-reference phenomena from the other fringe research fields, which is a big mistake. And therein lies a real serious problem. It's the same with ufology. There's a common thread, which is something I talk about in the book, that runs through many of the fringe research fields, and it's the same phenomena. It's just a different mask, and that mask is either applied by us or them, or both in some cases, and but the way that they interact with us remains the same. And that's a key factor, and it's something we should look at. You know, a lot of places don't have access to older manuscripts. Ireland here, of course, we've got access to manuscripts that can go back 1,000 years or more. So, and I know that that's very, very difficult within the United States and things like that. But being able to consider that there may be something to find within the older documentation pre-internet is really worth considering, and going back far enough. For instance, the Greys. For instance, let's look at the Greys. The Greys, we think, started in Roswell in 1947. That is not the case. In fact, there was Grey creatures. These. I'm not going to swear. These entities that have been seen even as far as California in 1857 in a particular lake bed there, and they were known to drag people off and drown them. But effectively, they were the Greys. So you know, there is a history of these blasted things within our history, and we just have to hunt a little harder to find them.
Well, you said something that I agree with wholeheartedly, is that too many times people who are researching a certain field stick within that field, not realizing that a lot of this phenomena overlaps. It's all related in one aspect. I look at it as looking beyond our concept of reality. Our view of reality is very narrow. It's like the light spectrum. We can only see this little bit, and there's so much that stretches out on either side to the infrared, ultraviolet, and a lot of phenomenon there overlaps. People who are experiencing, let's say, UFO phenomenon will also experience poltergeist and ghost types of phenomenon.
Yeah, we found that often, haven't we?
Yeah, a lot. I had previously mentioned John Edmonds, who had just passed away a couple weeks ago, on his ranch in Arizona, on the Stardust Ranch, and we interviewed him. And, you know, he was there 25 years and had a lot of problems with what seemed to be like gray aliens and even UFOs and portals. But these type of aliens were strange because they were very aggressive, very abusive, and yet at the same time he was also experiencing, I know the show Ghost Adventures filmed an episode there, one of the only UFO shows that they did, with Dave Schrader was with them, and they caught a lot of activity in the house. They caught things moving, shadows and poltergeist type of activity within the house, not really related to aliens, but again, it's all kind of related.
Yeah, you do get a distinct crossover, and but again, you know, even within cryptozoology, for a long time, if a Bigfoot was seen alongside a UFO, that account was thrown out. It didn't fit the paradigm. But now we're starting to see, well, we really should be considering these because they do go hand in hand. That then, of course, then leads to the question, well, what the hell is a Bigfoot doing with a UFO? What are these things and why are they connected? And it's not only them. It's right across the scale. If you consider earth spirits, or in Ireland we call them the fairies, in England the fairies, the same phenomena there. And the jinn in the Middle East, the same phenomena. There's huge connections with all that particular phenomena that crosses over into each other. And it's something that's rarely considered, that we're possibly looking at the same source.
Well, you mentioned with UFOs and Bigfoots, being reported together. And of course that gets tossed out because that sounds too fantastical to people. Yet even UFO experiencer Whitley Strieber has talked about in his books about how in some of his abduction encounters, he encountered people who had died. The spirits, not exactly spirits of the dead, but he has encountered people who had died or ghosts or whatnot, and he seemed to feel that at least the entities he was dealing with were very much involved with us on a spiritual soul level. So again, that's something that really crosses over. I
think today you bring up a great point. Then you happen to reference the spiritual soul connection. This is something I was lecturing over in England there last weekend, and this idea that especially today in the modern age we use the term soul and spirit. It's very interchangeable. That was never the case. That is us that has made that mistake. The soul and the spirit were very, very separate pieces of us. And in fact, the soul, which aka the shadow, was also the seat of our psychic abilities. Every psychic ability that we have sits with the soul. And when we have that experience, whether we remember it or not, that extreme experience, which can have negative connotations, within days or weeks of that particular encounter, we start experiencing new abilities that before lay dormant within us, and we think that's a gift from them. That is not the case. Those abilities belong with us. That is our shadow stepping up to the mark to try and make sure that we do not fall into that situation again.
Could it also possibly be, and that's one possible theory, but something else that's always struck me is the fact that when someone has that experience with whatever these entities are, we're dealing with things that are working at a different vibrational energy level than our 3D physical reality. Sometimes we're dealing with an alternate dimension or alternate reality or a higher level up on the vibrational scale. So when a regular person, who we all have these latent abilities, when they have this experience and they're kind of forced to come up to that higher level while they're having this experience, and then when they go back, because they've been risen up, it's awoken those things that are within us. So it has a lot to do, I think, with maybe the energy of that experience triggering these things to come back to the forefront. What do you think?
It is to a point. The problem that we face is that when a lot of these encounters tend to happen, they trigger the theta rhythm in our brain. Now that forces us into an area where meditation happens a lot there. Hypnotic suggestion happens within the theta. We are tricked out of remaining in beta. And that that is a conscious connection that comes through these interactions, whether it be from flashing lights over our heads or whether it be from the spirit of something that appears in the corner. It triggers our theta, and unless we are sharp enough to pick up on that within the first 10 to 15 seconds, we tend to get hooked, and that's unfortunate. There was a wonderful line from a piece by R.W. I believe it's pronounced Bush in 1984, in which he says a true shepherd goes through the main gate instead of jumping over the fence, and the real homeowner walks through the front door instead of climbing through the window. And the man who wants to tell us the truth, even if he comes from another planet, broadcasts it openly instead of whispering it in the ears of the helpless captives in the middle of the night.
That's good.
Interesting.
We should really consider the way that these things are interacting with us and the way that we have the clues around us as to what they are doing and the nature behind it. Take, for example, a particular girl that I spoke to in Scotland, and she had an encounter with beings of higher energy, as they portrayed themselves to be, entered her apartment. It was a top floor apartment, and they told her all these things. Now they had made sure that she couldn't move. She was paralyzed, and this particular encounter proceeded. I think it was around 20 minutes, and then they left. She thought it was very funny, and she happened to say that they told her all this wonderful stuff, which they normally do. They blindside us with this nonsense that they try, and whenever she came out of it, she told me that the cat that was on the bed as well, for some bizarre reason, had wet the bed. Therein lies the nature of the entity that was interacting with her. The cat can detect the true nature of the entity quicker than we can. The cat was afraid. We should be afraid. But we're not. We're blindsided because they force us into theta. They tell us all sorts of weird and wonderful stuff. And in fact, through the theta, we're also able to. They're also able to force the false memories as well. So for a lot of times, what we see, what we remember of what we see, is not actually what was there. Hence why a lot of this phenomena does not appear on camera. They hate the cameras because the camera shows what's truly there. We see this particular, the side effects of this phenomena when we're interviewing witnesses of UFOs. You could have 3 people seeing 3 different things. That's because they've linked through their conscious connection. And it's being broadcast to them what they're to see. But a camera will show something completely different. We see this right across the board, right into the paranormal as well. When you start bringing out a camera, they start pulling back, and if that particular phenomenon had nothing to hide, it shouldn't be afraid of our camera. But for some reason they are. But as I said, when we consider that these particular things are linked, if we consider UFOs, you have missing time during these particular encounters, many of which we can't remember. We just know that suddenly 2 hours have disappeared. Where the hell did they go to? But we also end up with missing time within spirits. We also end up missing time with jinn, with the old gods. Mm-hmm. All 4 of those are responsible for abduction, mischievous behavior, mutilation. And something I should add here is that they're all summoned. So we need to start looking at an esoteric nature to this. This is something that we've been blindsided by, that the true phenomena can be summoned. Well, that's not something that's coming from across the gulf of space. That's something that's here, or just beyond the veil.
That, when you're saying, is that something that could be akin to with occultists that are, whether you're talking about playing with darker magic or trying to summon entities, dark entities?
Yes. The idea of sitting in a circle and wanting to see a UFO fly over your head, well, what do you think you're doing? That is summoning by any other nature. That is an esoteric practice that you're partaking in. It's just we've given it a different name.
Yeah.
The idea of, for instance, we have these ideas that we can reach out to the universe, we can tell the universe what we want, and then we will reap the benefits of that. As long as we remain focused, we tell the universe what we want and we receive. That's summoning in any other nature. 20 years ago, people called that, there was a book was released called The Secret that came out, and that was meant to be this great secret of how you can attain, using esoteric practice. They never said esoteric practice, but how you can attain material objects and happiness and everything else by drawing it from the universe. 2,000 years ago, the Druids called that Grinhold. It's the same phenomena. We just keep renaming the blasted thing. It's the same with this other stuff. We keep renaming it, time and time again. Now, if we trace it by the phenomena, this is where it gets interesting, because that's where we start to see the connections. That's where we see the similarities, and we start eradicating the deceit. There is a huge amount of deceit behind the interactions with this phenomena. Whether we like it or not, we have to recognize that. But by recognizing by the phenomena, we start entering into a thing called the similar fact principle. Now, the similar fact principle is a process that is used in our courts to arrive at convictions. People say there are no proof for this. Oh, there's proof. We use the same manner of material to convict criminals in court, but we choose to ignore it.
It's interesting, and I can already tell that we're starting to get into your new book, some of the themes of your new book, The Deceptions of Gods and Men. Mm-hmm. So is your position that most of what we're experiencing is on a deceptive level?
Yes, without a shadow of a doubt. And that was a remarkable insight for me to step onto. I certainly wasn't expecting that, but when I go and I look at the interactions from folks from across the board, and see what's been happening, and look at the long term. And this is imperative, to look at the long term and understand how our bodies react. There is a biological ability that the body possesses that can give us that gift of discernment. That can indicate whether what we're being told is right or wrong. But we have to understand that. We have to understand how the body works and how the signal works. And also, we have to go back 1,000 years or more and see that there was a difference between the soul and the spirit. That's imperative. But it really was quite a wake up call for me to look at this, and also to see these liminal areas where these things are more likely to happen than other places, and we were using our modern technology to identify these particular areas, the satellites, to identify magnetic anomalies and positive and negative. Initially, we didn't bother with the positive, I have to say. I was aware that there was the other side of the coin, so to speak, but I was more or less interested in the positive magnetic anomalies, because that's where we tended to find Skinwalker Ranch, the Brown Mountain Lights. All these other areas tended to be within positive magnetic anomalies, places that had a history of this phenomena. Isdalen in Norway is another one. So all of these places that had this natural phenomena occur, whether it be lights, strange animals that are being seen, missing people, mutilations of animals and things like that, these were happening predominantly within the positive magnetic anomalies.
Let me stop you right there, Barry.
Yeah.
Just for clarification, what do you mean exactly by positive anomalies, magnetic anomalies? With the type of phenomena you're discussing, are we talking about magnetism or electromagnetism?
Yes. Electromagnetism. Yeah.
Okay. So
geomagnetism, in fact.
So what about negative magnetic anomalies? I mean, what do you find in those areas?
Yeah, that was a different kettle of fish altogether, and that the research for that didn't come to later, and that was a very bitter pill to swallow, because initially, I tended to find a lot of the ancient worship sites, a lot of which were found on the negative anomalies. And I paid no attention to that, really. I set it to the side until across my desk I happened to notice that 75% of the world's top suicide locations also fell within negative magnetic anomalies. And that made me curious. I says, wait, well, that's odd. That couldn't really happen by chance, could it? And, I began to ponder, is there something at these sites that seems to be drawing people into these to end their lives?
Well, there's that infamous location in Japan at the base of Mount Fuji, the suicide forest.
That's one. There's another. There are many that fall within that distinction. And I began to wonder. Well, did our ancients also sacrifice at these sites? Yes, they did. So was it something about the blood? Possibly. Is this some type of blood worship or something was going on? But these were also areas as well where a lot of people in the ancient rulers and priests would have gone to these liminal places, and they would have sought guidance and communication from beyond. And you would have had the places like the Oracle of Delphi, and places like that this would have occurred at. And certainly here in Ireland as well, we had those locations. But then something else became very apparent in that when we can consider this aspect of blood worship, which was relatively small, I might add, unless of course you were living in the Yucatan, which became 24/7. But these particular places, they were minuscule in their own right until we got to the modern age. Now, there were two different types of entity that tended to be found within the Greek traditions. And one was a scruffy individual with horns and hooved feet, which we would associate with Pan. And so that was one particular entity, but there was something else. There was another one, which was something we tended to find across the board. This one was known as the Word.
What did that look like?
It didn't have an appearance. It was just known. It didn't have a description. It was just known as the Word. The word was sought for payment. And on how to attain power, and win wars and everything else, and that in itself was destructive, because that also taught those particular people how to rule us.
When you say the word, I'm assuming the spelling is that WYRD?
I can't remember offhand how the Greeks referred to it or spelt it, but I remember coming across it in my notes. I just don't have my notes in front of me at the moment.
I'm only asking because I actually came across that word today, as a matter of fact, in relation to the occult.
And so these particular things, they were the ones that I became interested in. What are they? And why are they giving over information on how to rule us? Why are they giving certain individuals power and wealth and everything else that went with it? So I was very, very curious into them, and that led me down a particular path into this idea of blood worship and things like that. And I began to wonder: is it possible that certain industries and things like that still use aspects of the word, let's say, to gain information? Now there was associations, of course, suggestions, and of course those suggestions led to downright beliefs, which were never really never really had any foundation or substance. And for instance, the Nazis were using occult practices to contact something or other, but there was never really any paperwork to back that up. And it wasn't until much later that I found black and white evidence to show that particular link, and that in itself, that came from the Douglas Aeronautics Company. It was an American-based company in 1968. And in their memo, it's labeled A380. Now remember that word, or that terminology, A380. And there was other things after that as well for J.M. Brown of the Douglas Aeronautics Company. That company was absorbed by Boeing in 1997, and during that time they received funding to communicate with aliens. And I found this extraordinary, that there was a black and white paper to track this, that they got funding to use a Ouija board to communicate with aliens to try and obtain information.
They did.
For advanced engine systems. 1968 this was happening.
You just definitely wouldn't think that happened with a big company like that, would you?
You wouldn't, and that's the thing. You know, we got to ask. Well, obviously, it's not ending here. And then there were serious red flags that were being raised whenever I read the report. And the communication, for instance, with the alleged distant sources, was always accomplished in English, and without exception.
Yeah.
And the variety of topics, and this is where we start to get associated with the old Greek legends of the word. There were a variety of topics that were covered within the report, and they were getting information about sociology, about government, about economics, warfare, crime, medicine, engineering, and science. This is exactly what was happening back in Greece and pre the Greek times. This was the same phenomena, different mask. But the problem is, we were looking at this, that because we had a want to try and make that advancement, to step ahead of our fellow human, to make something bigger. Again, we're feeding on ego here. And that is a bitter pill to swallow. That this is how we're continually targeted. But when they're pressed on technical issues, the connections continually broke down. Repeatedly, every time they started asking about the engine designs, nothing. It just fell through. And this was something also that was seen within the Scully experiments as well. Now, there were unconfirmed reports that we should also consider. This in itself is just rumor. I never put this into the book. But there were unconfirmed reports suggested by that Carl Jung had spoke to a delegation of the U.S. military when addressing the UFO phenomenon. And it was during this time that he stated, "We may be looking at a mass Babylonian death ritual." Now, what the hell has that got to do with anything beyond the void? What are these aliens being associated with or doing with a Babylonian death ritual? It's not so much the aliens as because we've been dealing with the same blasted thing. We're just not taking long enough time to look at it. Because 20 years after Douglas, a rival industry, and remember that terminology, the A380? A rival industry developed the A380 and to become one of the world's largest passenger carriers.
Airbus.
But they also went on to develop an AI weapons platform called Astartes, possibly a nod to the Mesopotamian goddess of war, Astarte.
Yeah.
The old gods.
They developed Airbus A380, didn't they?
There you go. So we have to wonder what on earth they're communicating with, and why do they keep falling for this? Mm-hmm. For this same old rigmarole. It's like a broken record that they keep falling for, and I bring within the book, I bring attention to the shining ones or the bright ones, and they appear right across the board, and but it's where they appear is the key feature.
Can you explain what they're about, Barry?
Yeah, the shining ones, these beings that glow almost.
Shimmer.
They shimmer. Yes, there are many different names to try and describe them, but they're known as the bright ones or the shining ones. And these figures usually appear on the vicinity of rocky outcrops or stone plateaus.
Or back gardens.
And, most notably in caves, I should say as well. So they are something to keep an eye on, because, for instance, Medjugorje in 1981, there were 6 children who witnessed Our Lady appear on the mountainside.
Yeah.
And she glowed, and she was wearing various different things. But again, the description was the shining one or the bright one. And the key point here to make in regard to Medjugorje is the fact that the vital information that we must recognize is within the first 25 to 30 seconds. The children were frightened, stiff. They couldn't move. They were afraid. And there lies the truth of the nature behind this particular phenomenon. Whatever mask they take, it was their fight or flight kicked in, and they couldn't move. If this was something of a positive nature, why the hell does it need to scare us half to death? It shouldn't happen. If it's wanting to give us that message, give us a message, but don't bloody well scare us half to death. Now, whenever we consider, there's a book out there called "In Gods, Demons, and Symbols of Ancient Mesopotamia." It was written by a guy called Black and Green, and they happen to mention that in Mesopotamia, the gods themselves. Now, this is, bear in mind, Medjugorje was 1981. We're talking at a time here, Mesopotamia. We're looking at 3,500 BC. That's 5,500 years ago. The Mesopotamian gods were known to exude Melen and Nai. Melen was a light that was terrifying and awe-inspiring. Same phenomena, different mask. Whilst the Nai was described as a creeping of the flesh.
Yeah.
So whenever these particular beings tended to appear, it was interesting, because whenever I went back and I pulled my resources from the Marian Library, the International Marian Research Institute over there in Ohio, I needed to go back to the 1907 to pull the files in that and make my way forward to the present day to see what was actually happening there. Now, I couldn't go and look at the church approved, the approved appearances there of these shining ones. I wasn't interested in those because those fit a criteria. Those become political. I'm interested in the ones that didn't make it to the cut.
Yeah.
And I wanted to look at those and look at the ones that are still possibly being considered. In other words, they hadn't been interfered with. And it was interesting that a decade before war, before a major engagement, before a major loss of blood, a decade before, these blasted shining ones tended to appear more in negative magnetic anomalies and outnumber all others a decade before major conflict. And this went for World War I, World War II, the Korean War, the Bosnian War, the global war on terrorism even.
Yeah.
They all appeared 10 years before the war broke out, in predominantly in negative magnetic anomalies.
That's
So
a
we
bit
really
mind-blowing, that is.
Yeah, we really should be asking the question, where are we? And who's telling us beyond the void? Who's telling us this stuff? I did go and look at where we are today, considering what's going on in Eastern Europe, but I'm not going to tell you.
I know.
But yeah.
No, don't. No, yeah. Don't tell.
No, I'm not. I'm not going to say a thing. I'm leaving it there.
Let me ask a couple of questions. I'm going to back up a little bit. In the instances where you mentioned, like the children seeing the vision of supposedly of Mary or these shining ones, and people are afraid. I'm just playing devil's advocate here because I'm finding what you're saying to be utterly fascinating, but just from a devil's advocate standpoint, the fear that people encounter when they encounter something unknown, it's outside. Couldn't that fear also be caused by encountering something unknown, something so strange? The first reaction is to be frightened by it because we, as human animals, as living creatures, we do have that fight or flight reflex. And in a lot of cases, when we're dealing with something that just we don't know what it is, it scares the hell out of us until we learn more about it. I'm just throwing that out as a possibility. It's not necessarily that they're being controlled afterwards, but I mean, that's just the way that I look at it. But I'm also very intrigued by your hypothesis as well. You think about even stories going back into the Bible, when people have visions of God and it's the light, and what are the first thing they do? They throw themselves on the ground with fear. Look at the nativity story of the shepherds in the field, and the angels appeared in the light, and the first thing they did is throw themselves on the ground out of fear.
A very interesting point you bring forward there. Do you know that angels didn't exist before 587 BC?
I'm going to say...
What do you mean? Angels in the form that are in the books with the wings?
Angels within Christianity weren't really mentioned until after the 5th century AD, and before that, to help make that switch from polytheistic worship for the Jewish peoples, they had to. They took a lot from Babylon, of course, and the archangels were borrowed from the Babylonians. They were the planetary gods, and were written into their texts. And I think it was 587 or 584 BC. Before that, they didn't exist.
What about the older? I'm sorry to interrupt the stupid Skype delay. What of the older Hebrew texts going all the way back to Genesis and the original 5 books of the Old Testament, of where I use a perfect example what happened with Sodom and Gomorrah and the quote unquote angels, unless that was a mistranslation much later on, that showed up to tell Lot and them to get the hell out of Dodge before this catastrophe happened. They were called angels, and my understanding was that the Hebrew word that we translated into angels actually meant messengers. They were never described as what we think of as angels now, as the big luminous beings with wings. They just seemed like normal people, but who came with these messages to get out of Dodge. And there were several encounters mentioned like that in the earlier versions of what we call the Old Testament or the old Hebrew Testaments.
I can't remember the name of the guy offhand at the moment that wrote that particular account that brought in the angels from that particular moment. But before that, there was no mention of angels. and we shouldn't lose sight of that particular fact. And that is a painful one to come across, because we must consider then, well, if that's the case, what on earth are we praying to? What are we using angel cards and everything else, and we're trying to bring these things into our lives? What are you actually bringing into your life? We live in a society now where we have to have everything quick. Everything has to be fast. We don't ask, where's this coming from anymore? It even says in the big book, ask the spirit that it is. Ask the spirits that they are of God, and we don't do that anymore. Well, even to this idea now, where there's all this talk of guardian angels, again another term that's doing the rounds. The history of guardian angels come from it has a long line, and in Roman times, when anyone who was exceptionally good with the arts or theatre or anything like that, they were listening to their genius, and the genius itself was never inside. The genius was outside. This was something that influenced the thought process of the person outside. Now, when we follow that particular word, and I know that there are folks out there that said, well, that there are two different lines of meaning. I would beg to differ on this, because when you track it back into Babylon, you have these huge beings that are called the geniuses, and when you track that form, we call them geniuses now today in the modern sense, but when you move from genius to genii and then to jinn, the movement is quite clear back, that what we're actually dealing with in the New Age movement, if we look at the paperwork, are jinn. Not guardian angels, they're jinn. So what are jinn? So these are questions that we need to be asking. What are they? Where do you come from? The answers are there. There have been countless research papers done on this, and the Skull experiment, for instance, was a wonderful experiment that gave us great insight. It also showed that clearly the deception that's used as well. But the Skull experiment was a fascinating experiment that lasted over 5 years within the seance rooms of England. It was an old style seance that was run, and there were scientists and everything brought in to witness and observe and experience, and these things all made their appearances known. And I have to say, during the Skull experiments, hands appeared on the end of arms that ended at their elbows. So people were able to feel the hands on the cold hands on their limbs, and they traced that up until they came to the elbow. After the elbow, there was nothing else. There were photographs that were taken, and people were seen on the photographs that were meant to be of the deceased. And there was also, I have to say that there was also small flying craft, which we would identify as being UFOs. They were also flying around the room. And not only that, but a grey alien appeared in the room, in the seance room. What is an alien doing in the seance room, Pritel? These are the questions that we need to ask. Now, for 5 years, these people were told they couldn't switch on a light, and they had to work like the old seance of old. They had to work in the darkness. However, back in the 1970s, in the Livermore laboratories in the United States, the scientists there were having the same experiences as they were in school, in the Skull experiment, in the Skull experiments, but they were having it in broad daylight. So who's changing the rules now? it seems that this deception is something that continually affects us time and time and time again. We're never playing to our tune. We are playing to their tune time and time again. And there is an exceptionally high level of deceit within it.
Well, all this talk makes me think of, I'm going to go back into the Bible again, to the real Old Testament with Moses. And, first his encounter with the bright light, the burning bush on the mount, and then building the ark and having the conversations with what they would call God, which I've always felt that they're dealing with not what we would consider our modern concept of God, but they were dealing with some other type of, I'm going to say it, a very negative intelligence that demanded worship, demanded obedience, that had no problem with killing people or torturing people, to bend it to its will. And, even in the Ten Commandments, the one that always gets me is it says, "Thou shalt have no other gods before me, for I am a jealous God." Well, it's not sit there and saying, no, there are no other gods. It's implying that, yeah, there's other gods out there, but, you're only going to worship me instead. So somebody who's really trying to step in and control this group of people, the Hebrews at that time, implying that there are a lot of other types of entities out there doing this. So, it seems like this entity that they thought of as God or Yahweh or whatever you want to call him falls into that category.
That particular entity, of course, has a long history, and even whenever Abraham got to the land of Canaan, that particular God identified himself, I believe, as being, "I am the God," Shamesh. I think it was Shamesh, he said, or something similar, and came from its origins, of course, would have originated from the Fertile Crescent. So, these things continually change their appearance, and that in itself is the premise of the book. We make sure that we know what we're dealing with, and yes, we may get some things wrong, but when we stay on the case long enough, and that's the big thing. When we stay on them long enough, and we challenge them, that's whenever they disappear, they vanish. Because the moment that you get curious about their history, about their nature, about their identity, that's whenever they piss off. Because they know that you're onto them. They can't have the truth told.
Coming back to modern age and modern UFO experiencers, they're read many, many different accounts and spoken with experiencers that have what we call screen memories. They'll remember things a certain way, and then under hypnosis, what really happened comes to light. But it seems like that these entities and beings can present themselves to look like whatever our expectations are, and in order to deceive us, fool us, or to lead us down a certain path for an end goal that they desire. I'm going to use the same example for people who have near-death experiences, that they encounter beings that could be anyone from family members to angels to Jesus or whatnot, and yet I've always felt like what people are experiencing is like a hologram. It's an illusion in order to affect a certain message or to push somebody towards a certain outcome or desired outcome, a goal. So they'll present themselves as something in order to make sure that person does what they want.
Well, again, we have to go back and look at the case individually, and see where the deception occurred. At what point during the interaction did it happen? And we can see within some of the early cases that where this interaction was occurring, and the nature, more to the point, the nature behind the phenomena. If we take, for example, in Zimbabwe, there was a school out there where the kids were out at break time, and this thing landed behind the playground, and these beings were seen. The key fact here is within the first moments that the children saw them, they were frightened. And again, that is our fight or flight. It's kicking in. That's what it's designed to do. It picks up on the fear. Animals are exceptionally fast at this. They're much faster at that because of their makeup than we are. We have lost a lot of that particular ability. It's been smoothed out of us. But the likes of, I was speaking to Jacques Vallée, and he was telling me about a case over in South America, in which a young lad was sent out at breakfast to fetch the horses, or to round up the horses. So he jumped onto his own horse, and out he went. And as he was halfway across the field, he was buzzed by a UFO that landed on the other side of the field. And his natural curiosity, of course, at that point had brought him closer to the actual craft, and he ended up going inside. His life was ruined after that. He was ridiculed and everything else. But Jacques must have thought I was bloody crazy, because I kept asking, I think it was 3 times, what happened to the horse? What was the horse doing? I was more interested in what the horse was doing because of its nature. And he eventually told me that the horse was unconsolable. And the horse actually, it ended up going blind and had to be destroyed. But there lay the clue as to what was going on, that these particular things have not got our best interests at heart, and there is a distinct esoteric nature to these things. Now, people, of course, may be quick to say, "Oh, it's demons. It's demons." That's not the case. The demon, the aspect of the demon, is another mask. If we consider what the Greys are doing to people now, they're putting them down on tables and they're probing these things into them. They're doing all these experiments. Then you go back to the fairy. The fairy were doing the same thing. And then you go back to the medieval period in France, and you'll find carvings of demons sticking large pins into people's abdomens.
Yeah.
Same phenomena, different mask. It really is something to consider. But again, there is a distinct esoteric nature to the true phenomena. And I have to say true phenomena, because there are 3 different types. There is the true phenomena, there's the phenomena in which we want to believe, which we create, and are not necessarily there. And then there is for instance, within ufology, you have the technological advances used through the esoteric nature to create physical nuts and bolts craft that our industries have been creating and are using very, very well.
So there's 2 questions I want to ask. First of all, with all of this deception and this misleading of mankind, especially, playing with those who are looking for power and stroking ego for control. But have you been able to ascertain what their purpose is behind all this? Why the deception? Why the manipulation? What is the end goal to your mind?
There is an end goal. And that's something I talk about in the book, which I won't go into here. But If people want to know that, they can buy the book.
Don't want to give away the ending.
I've got to buy the book now.
But there is an end goal, and that in itself addresses a particular component within us, which again is part of the soul shadow connection. It links it to that, and the reasons behind that, yeah. So I shall finish it there. The answers in the book.
Okay. Which leads me to my second question. Now, with these entities and the deception and manipulation of mankind, and even people who think they're having positive experiences may not be, is it all lies and deception? Is there any light at the end of this tunnel, or any, because wherever there's negative, there's positive, there's yin and yang, yes. there's the way the universe works, there's always positive and negative, two sides of a coin. So is there a positive aspect to all of this?
Yes, we do find positive interaction with them as well, though that takes longer. That is not something that happens like that. The positive connections take much longer to connect with, I suppose, and maintain. But they do happen. But again, that gets us back to, we have to stop being so quick at accepting the first thing that comes along. When we crack open the Ouija board and we say, is great Aunt Betty there, and then suddenly you get a yes, don't consider that is Aunt Betty. You need to test it. And the moment you become suspicious of it, you can be sure it will hightail it out of there. It's a wonderful thing to consider that with this idea of our perceptions and things like that, as we get older, the perceptions they start to break down somewhat as an adult. But within children, they're exceptionally sharp. Around 2 years of age, you may 2 to 3 years of age, you may have some kids there that start seeing these invisible friends and things like that. The sensitivities of the child is very, very sharp. But the one way that we can shut down physically, the one way we can shut down our fight or flight, is by eating refined sugar. Now, refined sugar within our diets has been on the increase substantially within the Western world. It's in everything now, and in huge amounts. And if that serves to blind our fight or flight, what hope do we have? And when we consider,
happen? Sorry, Barry, but how does that happen?
The refined sugar itself, it shuts down the body's ability to produce the adrenaline and everything else, and to interpret what's coming through. So the likes of, if someone has a large soda drink, say, before they go to a haunted house, forget it. You forget it. You're blinded going into a situation where you should not be blind. And when we consider this, going into times in the year when there these liminal areas open, and these things come through back and forward. It was our children that were, of course, very astute to that. But what do we do with our children these times when the liminal doorways begin to open? We feed them full of candy.
Yeah. My mother used to just turn around and say, "Don't be stupid, Irene." She'd give me a biscuit.
Well, it's not only loading them with candy, but also programming out of them. Say, like, "Oh, it's your imagination." I heard that from my mother growing up.
I had that.
Every time I had a weird experience, it was, that was just your imagination.
Yeah, there's also a filter thickens over the eye between the ages of 7 and 13. So that child's ability to see the greater spectrum into the infrared and ultraviolet is narrowed after that period. So as adults, we can no longer see what we saw as children.
It's interesting. Most people. There are still some that can see.
Yes, most people.
Yeah, most adults.
So I always took it as that it was as the child grows older, it's just societal conditioning and things being programmed out of them to either not believe in certain things, and just again I look at it, liken it to that change of energy. You're changing that person's energy and how it vibrates, what it's able to relate to, and with all the programming and the bad food and whatnot, that energy, maybe that energy field starts to shrink, coming closer to the body, changes to a lower vibration, so we're not able to pick that up.
You know, it was interesting that that there was a series of experiments that were done globally, and it was asked time and time again, how do you see us in EVP sessions? And it just kept coming back as light. And that was quite a strange answer to get. But I remember whenever I was reading one of the first books there, the Influence, that looks at how attachments can gain access, and what they do to our bodies and things like that, how we can turn that around and recognize it. I remember the warning I was given at the beginning of that: don't become too bright or they see you. It was years later that the EVP sessions came in. How do you see us? As light.
Yeah, so this is where we used to say, you've got a gift. You're like a light moth. You attract moths like a moths around a light bulb.
Yeah, and certainly bright kids. Kids there can express the most beautiful light. And what happens to them? Sometimes it's that old dark moth that extinguishes them, sees it and can't have it, and just destroys it. It's a shame, an absolute shame.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know you don't want to give away the end of the book, obviously, but let me ask.
We're going to torture you at the end of this.
Well, let me just ask this: is there? I know with where we are, especially in Western society, we're just continually going down the tubes in terms of societal conditioning. You mentioned about, how we're always distracted, how we're never out in nature. And even if we're out in nature, we have our devices. I mean, I know people who'll go camping or they'll go and take a hike and, they'll still have their cell phone plastered right to their face. So they're not in tune with those natural forces. But is there anything that we can do living in a Western society in order to combat this?
There was a remarkable thing happened over the pandemic, that it was known in the British Isles as pandemic dreaming. And I don't know, Irene, if you've heard of this.
What's it called again?
Pandemic dreaming.
Yeah, I think I know what you're going to say.
It was interesting that during the pandemic, people were told to stay at home, and there were lockdowns everywhere.
Yeah.
And they were asked to work from home if they could. And that in those particular moments, we were able to see the body quickly reverse almost and pick up from where it left off about how it uses those extrasensory perceptions. And because people naturally were being woken up by the alarm clocks and they were going to work. But now, during this particular time, people had switched the alarm clocks off. And they were then entering their natural sleep cycle. And they were coming out of their sleep cycle naturally. So they were having the prophetic dreams and what they needed to watch out for that was coming forward and things like that. They were being told, they were being informed, and they were horrified. A lot of them were exceptionally frightening, and became known as a phenomenon as pandemic dreaming, because they were now tapping into their ability, consciously or not. There was part of them was reaching was reaching out through them to try and tap into what was going on.
Amazing, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And what's funny is in my I've been working virtually from home for years now, but unfortunately because of that, I have been working from home. I've never had that luxury of having that normal sleep cycle. I'm always getting up and I have to go to work, or I have to go to the gym before I go to work. So I'm still on that alarm clock and set cycle, and not being able to have, lately I've been working, wearing my Fitbit more, which is tracking my sleep cycle. And I see how bad it is, especially lately, the last couple of weeks. I used to sleep 8 hours a night. And now I'm lucky if I get 4.5 to 5.5 hours of sleep a night. I'm always constantly waking up, and then I have trouble getting back to sleep, and I'm just not having and then the level of deep sleep. This is what I really like about this app. It measures not only your deep sleep, your light sleep, and REM sleep. I'm almost always in a light sleep majority of the time. Very little am I in REM or deep sleep.
Do you have a light in your room?
I have a strange situation. My wife is one of those who has to fall asleep to the TV. Drives me crazy. I prefer darkness. So I wear a sleep mask, but then I'll also have earbuds in, and I'll play like music or something to drown out her TV, because otherwise I'm sitting there listening to the damn TV and it keeps me awake. So, it's, for a while there we were sleeping in different rooms, and that's not good for a marriage. So,
No.
we, that was our compromise. And then if I wake up in the night and she's asleep, I'll turn the TV off, and then she's fine. But it's the beginning of the night that's always the struggle, because I'm trying to tune it out and using blackout shades on my eyes, so I don't have light bothering me.
Yeah. It's unfortunate because the reason I asked if there was light in the room is because the light stops us from entering a deep sleep, which is where the melatonin helps repair cellular damage. So if the eyes detect any light, then we don't enter that cycle, and that can be problematic, especially if those people that live in cities and things where the lights are beaming through the blasted bedroom windows and things like that. I pity them.
Oh yes, I mean, I don't know how people can live in the city. I mean, I get to go into New York once in a while, and you see people, and they have the apartments, but they're always, you hear the traffic, they have the big white windows. They think they like the view of the city, but then yet it's constant bombardment on the senses.
Yeah, it was strange because I wrote a book there on the Banshee, and we put a story together about Dublin, and it was interesting that we referred to Dublin as being created by man, and that but in a strange twist of fate, we have now become the servants of the city. But oh well, such is life. It's up to them, I suppose. If they wish to live there, well, then they can.
Well, that's where we are now. Who's to say what's going to happen in the next year or two?
That's true. That's true.
Because our world seems to be changing at a very rapid pace.
That is very, very true. And there's all this move within the financial markets and everything else. Well, there's never a truer thing said. Buy seeds. At least you can eat the profit of the seed. You can't eat what comes from gold. No. Well,
Barry, this has really been a fascinating talk. I'm definitely going to pick up the book. Now, where can people find the book? The title, of course, is The Deception of Gods and Men.
They can pop onto Amazon there, and they'll find it there, amazon.co.uk or amazon.com. I'm led to believe that there's also an audio version, which is going to be out in the next week or so, of the book as well. And I love the audiobooks, especially when I'm driving. So that's always good.
Fantastic. Now, you've been doing a lot of appearances lately. Do you have any other appearances or anything else coming up that you want to promote?
I'm heading over to the UK in June the 24th to the 26th, and that's for Awakenings, and that's a huge event. And there's going to be a lot of big names there from the world of ufology and the ancient alien network and things like that. So it's going to be interesting.
Well, you would have loved that, Mark.
Yeah. Well, I'm stuck over here in Jersey. I am actually.
So that's that. And then that'll be me done for the year. I'm working on the next book here, the Fruit of the Gods, and that one. I loved the Deceptions of Gods and Men, but that's done now, and I'm working with the next one, and it is absolutely phenomenal. And I'm waiting on tests coming back from the laboratory about certain aspects that will lead this research on further. And also, the Deception of the Gods and Men looks at what is behind the veil, what we are communicating with, and the Fruit of the Gods looks at how we were doing it.
Fantastic. Well, I'll definitely be waiting for that one as well. Well, this has been great, Barry. Thank you very much for coming on the show. It's been great talking with you again, and I'm glad that things are working out for you real well with the conferences, the books, and everything. It sounds like everything's going really good.
I can't complain. There's no point.
Yeah, who would listen anyway, right?
That's true.
All right. Well, thanks again, and we want to thank all of our listeners for tuning in to another edition of the Paranormal UK Radio Show, the flagship show here on the Paranormal UK Radio Network. And Irene, where can people find us?
Everywhere, people, everywhere.
That's true. All right. Well, thank you, everyone. Have a great week. We'll be back next time for another edition of Paranormal UK Radio Show. We will talk to you all soon. Have a good evening.